After some thought, I'm shelving the keyword video for the time being. As I was crafting keywords and effects, I started seeing a lot of other players doing the same thing across different Facebook groups, and even the Digimon card game Reddit. Instead, today's topic to close out the week will be a discussion in regards to chase cards. Chase cards made their debut into the Digimon trading card game starting with the set BT6 Double Diamond, with the legendary Ghost Rare, Omnimon from BT1. Originally, it was my impression that chase cards would be a new print of old cards with an amazing finish and a low pull rarity. And while some of these are true, others quite didn't make that cut. With cards like the Gin Imperial Dramon and the Secret Rare V Dramon, these cards had a higher pull rate than anticipated, which is why their price is relatively low. But today's video looks at the history of chase cards throughout the years of the card game, what their initial price was, and where they currently trend today. Keep in mind, because TCG Player only has a 1-year lifespan for this type of data, I had to go back through eBay listings and even some old messages in which I purchased these or saw these cards being sold out. As for the price now, I'm taking a rough ballpark based on current listings and last sold. But ultimately, what tends to make or break a chase card? And what can Bandai do to improve it? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty details. As of the writing of this video, there are over 50 cards that you could classify as SP rares, chase rares, gold, ghost, whatever your heart desires. But ultimately, as soon as newer sets are released, there are a number of people who ask for astronomical prices when it comes to chase cards. And while some players may pay into this, the question I have for them is why? As I mentioned, this video went through the history of all chase cards, and what I'm about to show isn't meant to be a scare tactic or how you should be valuing chase cards as you approach sellers, but more so there is a time when the chase cards will hit lower points, even if it may take a year or two. For example, with that Omnimon we started this entire conversation with, this card had a price tag at release of about $800. This is a rough estimation based on data I could collect throughout some messages and discussion with other players. But today, this card is estimated at roughly $400. For a card that was released almost 3 years ago, this card has seen a negative trend of 50%. And while you may think, then what's the point of buying these chase cards because over time they won't be worth more than $1,000? This answer becomes a little bit more subjective, and ultimately Digimon cards don't bump up in price for at least a decade. If you previously collected Digimon Digi-Battle cards, some of these cards can go for quite a bit all these years later. Pokemon likewise had the same situation and even has a stronger IP. Fast forward to BT10, this set would introduce the black and gold Alphamon that saw some players wanting to collect because of its appearance. My only disappointment with this card was that it wasn't a more playable version, but a chase card is a chase card. This card would likewise see a negative trend, moving from its initial price at $400 to about $170. Much of the $400 price tag is likely based on the fact that the Omnimon had dropped to these values at this time, and as a result this became the starting point in which it could only drop. And even with BT11 Dimensional Phase, this introduced probably 3 of the most controversial chase cards for the fact that only 2 of them had a deck playable status, while the third wasn't even played at all. Looking over the metrics for these 3, you can see that Ulforce Vidramon held the lowest opening price at $150 and has dropped to the $35 value that you see today. This would mark one of the highest negative trends in regards to chase cards, with only one card having a higher negative trend. Though to be fair, if Ulforce Vidramon had started at a higher price, it would have probably taken the top spot. Because Mastamon and Machine Dramon were more playable decks at this time, you can see that their starting point was much higher. And in addition, because Mastamon has that waifu tax associated with it, trust me, this is definitely a thing, it did not drop as much in comparison to Machine Dramon. I'm not going to bore you in this video with every set and chase card. Largely, I wanted to analyze the price trends of chase cards in the Digimon card game to help players understand that with this newest set, EX7, what was the starting price, and where will trends likely fall? Unveiling the data up to EX5, you can see the negative trend continuing because honestly, none of these chase cards were broken in their own right. Though it should be observed that chase cards definitely seem to be on decline with BT12. Because while the rarer cards were being given chase card status, albeit its status as a secret rare, playability quickly became a topic of concern. It's my assumption that moving into BT13, chase cards became more defined as cards that would be playable, which is where there was an uptick in starting prices, and in a mixture of scarcity and playability, this brought back up the starting price from previous sets with lower negative trends. Though Ravemon Burst Mode, I am sorry. RB1 and BT14 also continued this trend, though I do recall picking up certain ones of these chases at double their current price. But it might also be that these particular cards today have significant drops in value due to the fact that the status of English exclusive isn't entirely true, and they are currently being printed in Japan. In addition, BT15 would introduce higher rarity versions of these cards as well. EX5's format was relatively short, and within the time span of Nationals, and if this format had been longer before BT15, I do think that these cards might have trended higher for a little bit. But with a fast-paced English release, this was not likely to happen. BT15 is where all of this changes, mainly because one major issue with this set was the fact that in my mind, it is still one of the worst sets in the Digimon card game. Though this is a contentious point because some players argue that BT11 was much worse. Give and take though, as these sets had some positives, and of course, the negatives. But because of the potential lack of product opened, the scarcity of these cards also created higher prices that would stick around longer. Despite BT15 being released in February 2024, the overall drop across the chase cards and SP rares is only larger for the less playable cards. Apocalypse due to its limitation, Metal Greymon Ace for being one of the worst Ace cards in the game, and Lilymon Ace for the fact that there's just better options. Notably, this is also where the first SP rare Angelomon would have a positive trend, as it's a combination of waifu tax and scarcity that made it much more valuable. Moving into BT16 and beyond, chase cards would once again have significantly higher prices than ever before. But there are a few things again to speculate in regards to these cards. Magnamon X, for example, had a lot of people wanting this card, and it wasn't just super shiny and cool to look at, but it was one of the first chase cards that was a mandatory 4 of if you played Magnamon X in the deck. Still, an initial price of $1,200? I personally felt $500 was the right place, and today it trends around here. Interestingly, this is the only other time an SP rare would see a price bump, but this could also be because many players were shifting to Imperialdramon post-restriction. And of course with EX6, the starter decks, and BT17, there was once again a negative trend which you'll typically see. With BT17, what fascinates me more than anything is that despite the chance of getting a chase card in almost every case, these prices are fairly high. But this could also be attributed to the fact that the Chase Greymons were much more common than the SP rares themselves. So now the focus of the video, what about EX7? Initial street prices for Sendromon, Zephyrgamon, Beelstarmon Ace, Heavy Metal Dramon, and the Chase Beelstarmon X were $400, $350, $450, $800, and $900 when I was perusing Facebook last week. But current prices indicate they are lower with negative trends. In terms of scarcity, these chase cards feel like your typical rates from previous sets. Playability is where everything comes into question. Sendromon and Zephyrgamon feel like they will ultimately end up in the $200 to $250 range, but if they can top an upcoming event like, say, this weekend, you might see them jump up. Heavy Metal Dramon feels like it could be good, but ultimately the shortcomings of this card are the fact that its support doesn't feel like it's completely there. I could see this card currently being valued between $150 and $200. But Beelstarmon Ace and Beelstarmon X are likely to be the highest chase cards here for the fact that they have waifu tax associated with it. And although they've dropped substantially from their starting prices, even though Beelstarmon X is not a mandatory 4 of, it could have a comparative price to Magnamon X. Overall, chase cards as cool as they are aren't something I feel a player should jump into right away, as they typically have a negative trend. What are some best buys you've ever had in the card game, or do you regret picking up chase cards? Let me know your thoughts on this topic, as next week looks again at cards of the future. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.